and one out.
Oh my God!
Deep to right field, way up there and way out of here!
How's it going, everyone? Connor here with the Diamond, and at the time I'm recording this video, we are entering the middle of September, with Bryce Harper being one of, if not the leading candidate for National League MVP, which of course has started yet another round of discourse surrounding one of baseball Twitter's favorite questions. Is Bryce Harper overrated or underrated?
That's a clown question, bro.
Now, of course, the question of whether or not a player is overhyped or underrated is nothing new in Major League Baseball, or really sports in general. In fact, the hype machine for prospects has been a part of baseball for generations. And in fact, you could probably make the argument that it's more powerful today than ever before. I mean, just take a look at all of the massively hyped debuts that have happened just in the last couple of years. Guys like Shohei Ohtani, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Wander Franco, and even looking into the future, guys like Adley Rutschman and Spencer Torkelson. These are guys that have been affected by the hype machine for pretty much their entire lives, at least since they've been teenagers. And whether it's fair or not, until they establish themselves at the big league level, really their only measure of success is whether or not they can instantly meet the unrealistic expectations that are placed on their shoulders. Now, this level of hype isn't anything new, of course. Just look at guys like Ken Griffey Jr. when they first broke into the big leagues. But with the advent of social media and other platforms in the age of the internet, the hype machine has taken a completely new form in recent years, and it's become a completely different beast entirely. And that has a ton of repercussions for the players that it affects. So today, I want to talk a little bit about that hype machine, and specifically how it changes the way that we as fans evaluate the players on the field, both the ones that we love and the ones that we hate. And when it comes to this topic, I can think of no better player to illustrate this discussion than Harper. Because while the other players I mentioned earlier have been greatly affected by the hype machine over the years, I can think of no other player that has had their career defined by it quite like Harper. And I know that other YouTubers like Foolish Baseball have discussed this topic at length, both in terms of Harper himself and his contemporaries like fellow first round draft pick Steven Strasburg. And I've linked to both of those videos down below for those of you who somehow haven't subscribed to Foolish Baseball yet. But while those videos mainly focus on their performance compared to their expectations, I want this video to focus on the nature of hype itself, how it affects our biases, and how it changes the way that we evaluate talent on the field. But of course, before we get to all of that, we really have to start at the beginning. When Harper was taken first overall by the Nationals in the 2010 draft, it was a huge deal. As big, if not bigger, than when they took Steven Strasburg at number 1 the previous year. Of course, both players were transcendent talents, and both were seen as possible saviors of the Nationals franchise. But the main difference between the two, besides the positions they played of course, was that Strasburg wasn't very well known outside of baseball circles up until the lead up to the draft, whereas Harper was a fixture of national sports media for years at that point. A few years before that 2010 draft, Sports Illustrated published a now iconic cover story on the teenage Harper, one that had a headline that read simply, "The Chosen One," evoking the iconic LeBron James cover from a few years earlier. And that moniker wasn't necessarily without reason. I mean, at that point, he had spent his entire life dominating competition that was often twice his age. And as a sophomore in high school, he was routinely hitting home runs over 500 feet, even with wood bats. It was truly the stuff of legend. And even without all that extra attention, he would have ended up being the consensus number 1 pick in whatever draft he ended up going to. However, that Sports Illustrated cover changed everything. All of a sudden, he went from a 15-year-old kid with a transcendent talent who is pretty well known in baseball circles to A 15-year-old who is a household name and is expected to be the next savior of baseball. Expectations that were not only unrealistic for the fans, but they couldn't have been healthy for Harper, and I really have to give him kudos for getting through all of that with his sanity intact, because let's face it, almost none of us would have. But for better or for worse, the story made him a national star, and all of a sudden, media members, scouts, and fans alike would start coming from hundreds of miles away just to watch Harper's games, and every single at-bat became an instant event. I mean, shoot, I remember my friends and I obsessing over every single Harper clip that was posted to YouTube at that time. And after he finally was drafted and was sent to the Arizona Fall League, I made it a point to go to as many of those games as I possibly could. And without fail, after every single one of those games, a mob of fans would swarm the dugout just to get a glimpse of Harper after the game, and if they're lucky, an autographed baseball. The hype was real, but it was also, again, very unrealistic and very unhealthy. You see, when you have that level of hype on your name, there's really only two acceptable career paths that are available in our current sports landscape. You either immediately become the superstar you were meant to be and ultimately one of the best of all time, like LeBron, or you crash and burn in an incredible inferno like Ryan Leaf, for example. There's really no room for a middle ground, or at least there's no convenient narrative for it, which makes Harper's example so much more interesting. You see, when he finally made it to the league, he was really good, a lot better than I think most people remember today. He was worth over 4 wins above replacement in each of his first 2 seasons, which is at least all-star caliber, and he already became one of, if not the best player on his team. But in his 3rd season, he had his first real struggles, and he only posted 2 wins above replacement. And it was about that time where the dreaded O word started getting thrown around on social media. After all, this is about the time where he was supposed to become the superstar that everybody imagined that he would be, that he'd finally live up to the hype of being the chosen one. But it just wasn't happening. And of course, it only made things worse that not only was he not already the best player in the league, he wasn't even the best in his rookie class, because some dude from New Jersey decided to go into the big leagues and start going gangbusters on the rest of the league. And actually, let's talk about Trout for just a second here, because I think he provides us with a perfect contrast to Harper. I know a lot of people like to compare the two because they feel like Trout is having the kind of career that Harper should have had, but I think they're great to compare because they come from completely opposite ends of the hype spectrum. Whereas Harper had to deal with unrealistic expectations for his entire life, Trout had virtually zero expectations. I mean, he played his high school ball in New Jersey, where scouts rarely go anyway, and there's a shortened baseball season because of the weather. So he didn't really get many looks in front of big baseball guys. And yeah, he was thought of as a first-round talent, but there were a lot of questions about his game, and not a lot of fanfare like a guy like Harper. So when he fell to the later parts of the first round of the draft, nobody really batted an eye. And when he came up a few years later, I'm sure most Angels fans didn't even know who he was. But all of that just made it that much more of a bonus when he went crazy during his rookie season and basically every season after that. So while Harper was always going to be seen as a disappointment because of the massive expectations on his shoulders, anything Trout did was pretty much a bonus because nobody really expected him to do much of anything. In other words, while the actual skill gap wasn't that far apart between the two, the perceived skill gap among the fans was massive. Mainly because they thought of Harper as being a disappointment and overrated, and Trout as being a huge surprise and underrated. And it went like that for the first few years of their careers, at least until 2015, or what I like to call the year that Bryce Harper shut everyone the hell up. all of a sudden something just clicked, and we finally got a glimpse of what Harper could really do on a baseball field at full strength. 9.3 wins above replacement and an OPS over 1100 to go along with a .330 batting average and 42 home runs on the year. It was, without a doubt, one of the best offensive seasons we have ever seen. And not only was it magical to watch from a fan's perspective, but it also finally started to shut up all of the haters and doubters that had been going against Harper ever since he made it to the major leagues. Finally, it seemed that he was blossoming into the superstar that we all expected him to be, and it seemed like those narratives would be finally put to rest. That was until the very next season when he reverted to his previous performance and that O word started cropping up once again. This time, it wasn't just that he was missing out on those massive expectations set for him, it was that now he finally had met those expectations for one season and then couldn't follow it up. And that is when everything started to turn south on his narrative. He became known as an overrated player, regardless of the fact that he came back with 2 more really great seasons after that kinda disappointing 2016. And of course, things only went further when he finally entered free agency, left the Nationals, and signed with the Phillies for what was at the time the single longest and richest free agent contract of all time. 13 years and $330 million. At that point, Harper was facing a triple whammy of expectations. At first it was, oh, I thought he was the chosen one. And then it became, oh, yeah, but what happened to 2015 though, huh? And now it became about proving that he was worth that $330 million payday that he had been working for his entire life. And it seemed that he had reached yet another point where no matter what he did on the field, he just could not win in terms of his career narrative. 2019 was actually one of his most valuable seasons as a pro, and he followed that up with one of his best performances at the plate during the shortened 2020 season. But if you had a discussion about best players in the National League or MLB in general, it seemed that he would be left off those lists, or at the very least, he'd be added in as an afterthought, not really in that top tier of elite players despite his performance over those last couple of seasons. But something weird happened in between the last couple of years. As Foolish Baseball so eloquently put in his video, Harper had reached a point where he was so widely considered as overrated that he had somehow come all the way back around to becoming underrated. And so, by the beginning of the 2021 season, for the first time in his career and really the first time in his life, Bryce Harper entered a baseball season without an overabundance of expectations and hype from fans and the media alike. In fact, I really didn't hear much of anything about Harper heading into the season and really throughout much of the first half. But when he came on strong in the second half and went gangbusters during August and the beginning of September to take over the National League lead in WAR, it came as a huge but pleasant surprise to not only me, but I'm sure baseball fans all across the country and all around the world. The last month and a half have served as a huge reminder of just how good that Bryce Harper is, was, and really always has been. We've just been blind to it over the years because years and years and years of hype have built up an insane version of what we think he should be in our heads. A version of him that he never really could be. And because he isn't that version that we built up in our heads, we somehow see him as a disappointment, when in reality, he has put together a phenomenal career. One that, dare I say, is still on a Hall of Fame track. And if he's able to actually pull this off and win the National League MVP this season, I think it's going to go a long, long way towards him finally reclaiming his career narrative and finally getting over that dreaded label of the O word. If there's one thing that we should learn from the plight of Bryce Harper, it is that it is absolutely possible for a player to be overhyped, but not necessarily overrated, and that we as fans and as members of the media have to be better about keeping our expectations in check, because if we don't, we run the risk of not being able to appreciate the actual talent we see on the field because we're so focused on what we think they should be in our heads. So with that being said, I pass things off to you. What do you think of Bryce Harper? Is he overrated, underrated? Do you think he's going to win MVP or make it to the Hall of Fame one day? Let us know in the comment section down below. But with that being said, that's going to do it for this edition of the baseball vlog. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.